There, Glenn. Good morning. How are you? What have
I'm
you
doing
made
great.
of Perkins and the news now confirmed that he'll be out for the season? What did he mean? What do they miss?
Yeah, it's a pretty bitter pill to swallow there. I mean, I think if you had gone down the list of preseason guys this defense couldn't afford to lose, I think you'd probably not get very far before you hit Jacoby and Guillory and Harold Perkins. And now a month into the season, here you are, and you've lost both of them, and it's a pretty significant hit. And look, have we seen the best of Harold this year? I don't think so, but that's just a guy that you cannot afford to not have on the field for SEC play because he was going to figure it out eventually. They were going to get him more involved. And I actually thought they were starting to turn a corner in the South Carolina game. He had some really good pressures in that game and was creating some of that havoc that you were hoping to see in this Blake Baker defense. But just the athlete, the ability, the talent that he has when he's out there, when he's at his best, Brian Kelly, I think, said it best. It's something that offenses have to scheme against and scheme for and plan against. So it's a huge loss for LSU to have him go down. You hope that he can get healthy and back on the field here. Not sure what that means for his future or anything like that. Those decisions haven't been made. But as far as the defense goes, I would imagine that LSU goes back to what they were doing to start the year, where they'd have Major Burns kind of slide back down into that star position. You'd have Whit Weeks and Greg Penn in that inside linebacker duo, and then West Weeks would rotate in a little bit there as well. So I think this is a loss that you can overcome, but you can't recreate the kind of potential havoc that Harold would have had on opposing offenses, especially in the SEC when you need all your best athletes and your best talent out there to try to survive this gauntlet of a schedule.
Kelly pointed out the guys who had stepped up in the injuries before, all of them freshmen. When you talk about Emory, Caden Durham, Jacoby and Guillory, Ahmad Bro, what happens now with Perkins?
I'm sorry. What do you mean? What happens?
Who's next man up?
Oh, yeah. Well, I would imagine that the next man up is going to be West Weeks. I mean, I think he's going to see a lot more, time in this thing and kind of on the field a little bit more. It sounds like he's going to play this week, according to what Brian Kelly has told us so far. So, yeah, I would imagine that he's in there. I think, look, I was extremely impressed with Dominic McKinley and his first action this last weekend against UCLA. I would love to see him and Ahmad Bro continue to share the field some. I understand that you want to get your veterans out there and that you need those guys, like Suggs, like Gio Paez and Sean Washington, some of those guys. But I still think you want to also find reps for those freshmen. And, McKinley, I thought, responded pretty well last week. Ahmad Bro, I think, is a tank there in the middle of that defense. So I think he's got a really bright future ahead for himself. So very, very curious to see how they kind of build this thing in the front seven. As far as kind of what the secondary looks like, I would continue to kind of maybe point at Ashton Stamps and, depending on what happens here with Zy Alexander, it sounds like he's going to be iffy this week with that concussion. Maybe you move Javian Toviano back to corner to give you some help there. But I would imagine it'd be Ashton Stamps, J.K. Johnson, P.J. Woodland, Jair Brown, those guys kind of all rotating at cornerback. But LSU's going to move those freshmen in. And I would imagine you keep a look at on the linebacker side, Xavier Atkins was somebody that Brian Kelly mentioned yesterday, hasn't been activated yet for this season. If they do decide to have some three linebacker sets, I think that would be a guy that you would see activated and rotated in. So there's a lot of different options, a lot of opportunities for freshmen to see the field as these kind of unfortunate injuries pile up. But there's certainly a lot of talent and a lot of reps up for grabs right now.
Tylen Singleton was a name that popped in recruiting. Have you heard much about him and where he fits in now here early on in his freshman season?
Yeah, I haven't. I think he's played a little bit on special teams so far. He's had a little bit of a role, but I think he's also one of those guys that, if they don't feel like he's ready to be a major contributor on defense yet, then maybe you kind of hold off and see if that redshirt season doesn't come into play. Now there could be a time here where LSU decides to play a lot of these guys if these unfortunate injuries continue to happen for them. I could certainly see a world where Tylen Singleton can kind of be that that hybrid linebacker safety role. I mean, I think he'd be perfect for the Star. It kind of sounds like a position that was made for him. I don't think they've repped him all that often there. I think he's been mostly at linebacker, but he's somebody that I think is just going to continue to develop. Him and Devon Keys are the two kind of linebackers that they brought in along with Xavier Atkins, and it just sounds like Atkins is a little bit ahead of the curve right now as opposed to the other two, and was the first name that Brian Kelly mentioned on Monday when we asked him about who could be that next man up at the linebacker spot.
Burrow and Daniels took center stage last night as the football world just gawked at incredible quarterback and football game. What are you seeing right now with Garrett Nussmeier? Because through the first month of the season, I think he's playing the position as good as anybody.
I would echo those sentiments completely. I mean, just go back 6 or 7 years and tell an LSU fan that you would have been watching two Heisman Trophy winners from your team going back and forth in that kind of a battle and prime time on Monday night. It has to be a pretty
would have had you admitted to a hospital.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, euphoric. Euphoric was the word that I put out there yesterday on social media. It had to have been a pretty euphoric feeling that's what happened. And now you've got another guy in Nussmeier who, you're absolutely right, has been really lighting it up, and I think is probably been the heartbeat of this team so far. Certainly on the offensive side of the ball, they're leaning into him completely offensively, and he's responding. I mean, those two 90-plus yard drives that he delivered against UCLA to really kind of put that thing to bed was extremely, extremely impressive. He made some really nice throws on those drives, kept the offense ahead of the chains, was able to work in running backs, tight ends, receivers. He's spreading the ball around, getting different guys involved, and I've just been super impressed with his decision making as a whole. I know people can point to the couple of throws that he had against South Carolina that he wish he could have back, but I mean, outside of those, with the amount of times that they're throwing the ball, I don't think you can really nitpick Nussmeier's game so far. I think he's been as advertised, if not exceeding expectations this year, and he's only going to get better. I mean, this is only his first season, kind of start. I mean, this is a guy who's got a lot of football ahead of him this year, and we'll see kind of what happens though, going in for his future. But he's somebody that I don't think you could map a better start for in terms of his first 4 games of his career where he's been a full-time starter.
Glenn, I'm looking around the league, and some of these defensive fronts in the SEC are going to be tough, including Ole Miss. I mean, Walter Nolan has brought a new dynamic to that front that'll be here in a couple of weeks. What do you make of this offensive line now that we're a month in? You got the data. You've seen them play. Where are you on that group?
Well, I think that it goes hand in hand with what Nussmeier has done on the field. I mean, you have to keep him upright, and I do think that this offensive line has done a fantastic job of doing that. I mean, he's been protected very well. He's had time to make his reads and throw the ball where he needs it to go. So from a pass protecting perspective, I do think that this offensive line is about what we had expected. I mean, they were one of the best last year. I think they're one of the best this year. It's just the run. It's just the run game, and I think that there's a lot of things that you can point to as to maybe why it hasn't gotten off the ground the way that they would hope. And I think defensive scheme is a part of it. And I think another part of it is just trying to find ways in which to get creative ways in which to get those guys more involved in the run game. And you've seen that at times. Like, I was extremely impressed with what the O-line was able to do in spurts in the South Carolina game to spread Caden Durham loose and to get Caleb Jackson on the perimeter a couple times. Like, I think that they found something there. I hope that they can go back to it and lean into it a little bit more with all the movement that they were doing in that game. And we've been talking with Emory Jones, we've talked with Will Campbell, and it really just comes down to those guys moving as one unit. I think that they feel like they can compete with anybody. They're a very confident group. I mean, you don't have to spend 2 minutes with each of the two tackles and pick that apart. I mean, they are very confident in their ability and their potential, and I think that they'll continue to grow throughout the season. Look, at this time last year, I think there were similar questions about the run game, but then Logan Diggs comes back and he has a couple really big games. And really in the middle of the season, I thought he was a great, kind of complement to what Jaden and that offense was doing. And I think that they can get back to that point there where they have a running back or two that can be reliable and consistent in SEC play to really help take some of the load off of Nussmeier in the passing game. So this season's still got a long ways to go, and I'm still pretty bullish on that offensive line, but certainly they feel like there's work to be done there.
Aaron Anderson's been a breath of fresh air here to start the season. You've seen the growth and development that's taken place since he transferred over from Bama. What do you make of the wide receiver group? And it's been obvious they've tried to get Shelton Sampson on the field. Where do you think they stand going into league play here in a couple of weeks on how they want to rotate this spot?
Yeah, look, I think if you kind of go through the list of the receiver group and just the receiving core as a whole, when you include Mason Taylor in that group, it's pretty much Taylor and Anderson that I think are 1A and 1B right now for Nussmeier in terms of targets and who he's looking for on the field. I mean, I think one of the more impressive catches of the season so far was that little, I think it was a 3rd and long play in this UCLA game where Nussmeier had to roll out to his right. He was looking downfield and he saw Aaron Anderson, and Anderson was being draped by a defensive back from UCLA. I can't remember who it was, but he was all over him, and Nussmeier still fired the ball in there, and Anderson made a great contested catch with this UCLA defensive back pretty much all over him. And I think that's a very, very encouraging sign for a player like Anderson who had size is always going to be the question with him, but the fact that he can go and he can make those contested catches along with the speed and everything else that he can bring, I think that was a really good sign if you're an LSU fan that he's for real and that he's here to stay. So been very impressed with Aaron Anderson. Been very impressed, obviously, with Mason Taylor and what he's been able to do. Hopefully, Brian Kelly will want to talk about him now. I mean, we're catching on to what Mason Taylor can do. Hopefully, BK can give us some more quotes on him going forward. But I think that LSU sits in a really good spot with their receivers. Kyron Lacey has been a pretty efficient and reliable catcher for LSU this year. I think he's taken another step forward. They love what they have with CJ Daniels, and now they're just trying to get Chris Hilton back on the field. And I think if they can get Chris Hilton back on the field, we saw it all offseason. Him and Nussmeier have a really nice connection, especially on those deep balls. And I think he can add another layer and another element to this offense if they can get him healthy and back to where he was for most of this offseason. So I think this passing game is just going to continue to improve, and obviously the receivers are going to be a huge part of that.
Did you see Braden Swinson having this type of breakout performance here in his senior year?
No, I mean, I didn't. I mean, I thought they were going to, and it has been. It's been a rotation there with him and Deshaun Womack and Gabriel Relaford kind of all seeing, time at that spot. But, man, Swinson is making the most of it. He has been just dominant these last 2 weeks in particular. 5 sacks and a couple forced fumbles. He's been all over the field. They've brought him, blitzing off the edge. They've had him blitzing from the middle on some of those prowler packages that we were talking about. They really like what he can do from a versatility standpoint at edge rusher, and he's making himself some money. I mean, I think there's just no other way to put it. I mean, he's been absolutely fantastic for this defensive line. He's been perfect for what Blake Baker's scheme has needed, and he's been the most dynamic player probably on this defense. I mean, I don't think there's anybody else that you can say that has made the kind of impact that he has here through 4 weeks. So would expect him to continue to take those steps forward, and I don't think that LSU is going to go away from guys like Womack or Relaford or some of these younger players. But it's hard to also take Swinson off the field with the way he's playing right now. So that's a major credit to him. It's a credit to Kevin Peoples, who Brian Kelly has really sung his praises the last couple weeks of his development with him, and also with Savion Jones. So those two guys are really kind of taking that next step forward, and have been obviously anchors for a defensive line that has wanted to create havoc, and I think is creating some pressures here pretty consistently over the first month of the season.
They changed the rotation of the running back on Saturday a little bit. I think that's kind of how Frank Wilson likes to operate. as far as his scheme goes. What have you made of Durham's performance the first couple of weeks, and now as he emerges as a guy that they got to get him the ball every week?
Yeah, absolutely. He's explosive. He's extremely explosive. I think, to your point, they're going to probably lean into the hot hand kind of deal with the running backs, and I think that's a good thing. Look, Josh Williams had some really nice, consistent runs, some good carries. But the thing that really impressed me in that UCLA game, in regards to the running backs, was LSU using them in the passing game, and we had seen that throughout the entire offseason in the spring and in the summer and certainly into the fall, how much LSU wanted to kind of utilize those backs in the passing game. And you saw that with a couple passes to Durham, with a couple to Caleb Jackson, and they were able to get those guys on the perimeter, and they were able to keep it moving ahead and stay ahead of the chains and kind of get some 5, 6, 7 yard chunk plays, and then you get the big Durham play there that kind of busts the game open. So I'm very intrigued and excited by that aspect. I think LSU can continue to lean into those guys in the passing game and continue to explore different ways to get them unloaded in the run game as well. I mean, I think that there is some truth to the fact that defenses are loading the box on them right now. They don't want. And I think the way that Nussmeier has performed, eventually these defenses are going to have to learn and maybe not put so many guys in the box, and that could open up some things for the running game going forward. So very excited by Caden Durham. I think he's going to be a guy that you see consistently in there, but they're not going to go away from Josh Williams or Caleb Jackson. I think all three of those guys are going to get a healthy amount of touches throughout the season, and we'll see if maybe one or two of them maybe wind up standing apart, but I do think that there's enough to go around for all three to be involved in the game plan.
Follow Glenn at GlennWest21 on social media. Read his work over at Go247. Last one, G, I'll get you out of here. Joe Sloan, first-year play caller, about a month in, going into league play here in a couple of weeks. What have you made of the performance, and what do you anticipate?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at just kind of LSU's offense right now, you can see the relationship that Sloan and Nussmeier have is paying dividends. I mean, from a passing game perspective, I've really liked the designs, the play calls, the decision making from Nussmeier in those situations, and you can see LSU really leaning into that aspect of the game, and it's really no surprise to me because Joe Sloan's been working with Garrett the last 3 years and knows his game better than anyone, and knows how this offense can have success with Nussmeier under center. And look, I think there's some growing pains there as well. I mean, I think if you talk to Joe Sloan, he'd tell you that there's some things that he wants to do better going forward. But I do also think that at the end of the day, this offense is still averaging around 32, 33, 34 points a game, and consistently moving the ball down the field. I think probably the one area where I think LSU's offense as a whole feels like it can get better at is kind of the red zone area and being more efficient in those inside the 10, inside the 5, inside the 20 plays and kind of where you can go from in those positions. So I do think that's maybe one area they would like to see improvement, but they're pretty good on third down. They're moving the chains pretty efficiently between the 20s, and they're setting themselves up for a lot of opportunities to score. It's just, can they continue to hammer in those consistencies and be kind of be the dynamic offense that I think they believe they are and can continue to grow on.
Glenn West, great work as always, man. We appreciate you waking up with us. Read his work at Go247 and follow him on social media at GlennWest21. See you, G.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, there he is, Glenn West, giving us a little perspective there of LSU heading into this week's matchup versus South Alabama. As good perspective there. Make sure and catch up with Glenn. I agree with him through the offensive line take. I think this offensive line, to talk about Nussmeier's success and the ability that Nussmeier is really playing with and the efficiency that he's playing with, I think a lot goes into what the offensive line is doing up front for keeping him clean, keeping him upright. I mean, there's not a lot of times where he's running for his life. They've really done a nice job of pass protecting, and hopefully last weekend's performance versus UCLA really can feed the confidence of what they need to start to develop what seemingly is a respective run game when it